So anyway.
Good morning. Boy, it seems to be a cold morning. We're missing a lot of the people who are normally with us. So let's hope people aren't sick, they're just cold. I'm Judy Ann Files. I'm one of the three facilitators here for Montrose Forum. We welcome you and thank you for being here. We have a really interesting program this morning, something we've been working on for quite some time. So I'm going to introduce to you the main characters, and then they're going to kind of take turns speaking. First of all, Courtney Jones, Sergeant Jones. She's the Academy Director and Professional Standards and Training Person for the Montrose Police Department. Sergeant Ryan Rumbaugh is the Supervisor of the 7th Judicial District Drug Task Force. That's a big title. Montrose County Sheriff G. Lillard, and you'll know why he's involved with the MPD today. And of course, Montrose Chief of Police, Blaine Hall. Another person I'm going to introduce when she gets here, but I'm going to tell you now so when she walks in you won't be surprised. Brianna Sunderland is the Vice President for, let me get my words right, the Vice President for Community College Affairs for Colorado Mesa University. And obviously they're very involved with this new program we have started here in Montrose. So, Courtney, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Like she said, I'm Sergeant Courtney Jones with the Montrose Police Department, and I've recently been tasked with directing the new police academy that's going to be occurring here in Montrose. So, what is the Western Colorado Law Enforcement Academy? It was envisioned by leaders within the city of Montrose and the Montrose Police Department about 2 years ago as a way to try and add more people to our police force and to law enforcement in general here in the Montrose area. And this May, hopefully the first couple weeks of May, we will see the first group of cadets come through that program. But this couldn't have been possible without our partners, and that's one reason why Sheriff Lillard is here today. The partnerships that are going to be included in this academy is Colorado Mesa University, the Montrose County Sheriff's Office, Montrose Public Safety City Attorney, the 7th Judicial District Attorney's Office, as well as our friends from the Colorado State Patrol and CBI. So why does Montrose need a police academy? I think that's a thought that may have gone through all of our minds at some point when this was first beginning. And the reason why is because Montrose is growing. We are having more calls for service each year than the year before. So there's more of a need for more first responders in our community. And the candidate pool is very small and seems to be getting smaller as time goes by. And there's a lot of competition between the different agencies for those few candidates. So having an academy here in Montrose will attract candidates from out of our region, and it will also catch the attention of some of our local folks who may be considering a career in law enforcement, and having something right in their own backyard may encourage them to take the plunge and go for that career. But there's also some other benefits to the people who are already working in law enforcement. For our more senior officers and sergeants, working in an academy and supporting an academy gives them new skills that they can use to advance their career. And even for our newer officers who are going to be teaching in the academy, sharing some of their skills and experiences, it's going to make them a better officer. Because when they're in a teaching capacity, they start thinking a little bit more about why they do what they do. And they recall back on their training days and best practices. So it makes them a better officer as well. There's another reason that we need an academy, and I'll kind of walk you through what it's like when we hire someone who is going to be going to the academy. So you're going to hear a term throughout the presentation, and that term is sponsored. When an agency hires someone and pays for that person to go to a police academy, that person is considered a sponsored cadet, which means that that agency is going to pay their way, they do the background check, that person is representing that agency. If the Montrose Police Department or Montrose County Sheriff sponsors a candidate and hires someone, and they hire them today, they sign on the dotted line, they will have to wait until early to mid-August to begin the next academy. Because the other academies in our region are fall and spring academies. They're going on right now, or they will start in August. So if they go through the academy, they'll graduate sometime in December, and then they will begin their field training, which is what happens at the agency that they go to work for. And that can take anywhere from 3 to 4 months, depending on scheduling, the cadets' improvement as they progress through the training program. And they're gonna end up finishing their training in late May or late April or early May. That's nearly a year and a half after they've been hired. And during that time, they could get snatched up by another agency, or just for some other reason, they may choose not to stay with that agency, and then we lose a candidate and have to start all over. So when our partners started thinking about bringing an academy to Montrose, they didn't really want to compete with the other academies that exist in our region, because there's great academies that already are in Western Colorado. They just all happen to be in the spring and in the fall. So there was an opportunity there for an academy to occur during the summer months, when there was very few across Colorado even that offered that same time frame. If we hire an officer now, if we sign on the dotted line with someone today, they will start our academy in early May. And they will be wrapping up their academy training in early September, right around Labor Day. That puts them in our FTO program right around the end of, to conclude that, right around the end of this year. So we're gonna have that person ready and on their own and working on a patrol shift here in Montrose about 6 months sooner than we would if we'd waited. So how does an academy get started? There's this great idea, we're gonna start an academy. What does that mean? What does that look like? What kind of work do us and our partner agencies have to put in to make it happen? Well, it's actually quite a lot. First of all, we have to apply with the state Peace Officer Standards and Training Board. That's the board that oversees everything to do with law enforcement here in Colorado. We have to apply with them and show them why we need an academy and that we can pull this big adventure and project off. Once that application is approved, then the hard work begins of developing the content that we're going to be teaching. And there are about 75 individual lesson plans that have to be created, including the content that the state says that we have to have. And then those lesson plans have to be reviewed by a panel of what the state calls subject matter experts. So those are people who have been deemed experts in report writing or constitutional law, things of that nature. So that's just a small list of the topics that we have to write lesson plans for listed there. Report writing, state statutes, drug investigations, courtroom testimony, things of that nature. Next, we have to identify who our primary instructors are going to be, specifically in areas that are special skills. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's going to include firearms driving and arrest control and defensive tactics. And those instructors have to go through proving that they are justified to be leading content of that nature in the academy. So these people have to have 80 hours of teaching at another academy somewhere in Colorado, and they have to be a trained instructor in their discipline, and then they have to attend some academic courses as well to know that they're able to do adult learning and guide and direct adults as they go through the classes. Once that's done and the lesson plans are approved, the next step is to get approval from Post for the different sites that are going to be used in the training process through the academy. And in an academy setting, there's a bunch of different places that we go to train. This room right here is going to be one of them. When our academy begins, there will be classes held in this room. There will also be classes held out at the San Juan Range west of town. There will be physical education classes occurring at Cerise Park. And there will be defensive tactics taught at the high school gym. So all of these locations around town have to be documented and shared with the Post Board, and then they have to do a review of those sites to make sure that they're safe and that all the needs of the students will be met. First, that's approved on paper, and then the folks from Post come down and they look at those sites. And just yesterday, Post came down and reviewed all of the sites that we will be using in our academy, and they approved of the sites that we've chosen. So that was our most recent big step towards making this academy happen. The next two steps will begin to come into play once the academy actually gets underway and once the application process begins. Once we start getting applicants, whether they are sponsored or self-payment, we have to be very diligent in keeping our records of what classes they've attended, their background. We have to make sure that these are qualified individuals that are good people. We do basic background investigations on these folks as well. And once the academy begins, we do have to keep track of the hours in each subject that we are teaching to make sure that our cadets are getting the education that they need before they go out there on the street. And once the academy is underway, we may have our friends from Post come out and check in on us every now and then and make sure that we're teaching what we're supposed to be teaching, not leaving things out, and that we're not spending an hour talking about underwater basket weaving instead of talking about constitutional law. So that is something that will happen throughout the academy, and that happens at all academies, even those that have been operating for quite a while. So who are the students that are going to be here in this room taking classes this summer? And the answer is that they could be from a couple different backgrounds. They could be people who are studying criminal justice in a college program and want to finish that study by attending an academy. They could be cadets that have been hired by the Montrose Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, or another agency, and that agency wants to pay to get their cadets through an academy in the summer. They could also be non-sponsored individuals who want to make an investment in this academy and in their education with the hopes that down the road they might be able to be sponsored by another agency. Some of the smaller agencies in Colorado aren't able to afford to sponsor somebody. They aren't able to put out that money with the hopes that a candidate will succeed in the academy. So they will only hire folks who have already graduated an academy. So some people, if they want to work in a much smaller community, may want to go that route. And the audience that we'll be advertising to and trying to recruit people from for our academy and for our agencies could be from a variety of places. We recruit all over the state, but the academy recruitment will be primarily for a Western Slope audience and students from anywhere in Colorado that want to attend a summer academy. And like I said, the selection process for the student varies depending on where they're coming from. If an agency has taken it upon themselves and vetted that cadet, then we will work with that agency to get them into the program. If this is someone who's just applying, who's sponsoring themselves, who's paying their own way, then we go through a bit more of a background check on our end to make sure that they are a good person who's going to bring good things to the program. So we'll dig in a little bit deeper into what it is exactly that the cadets are going to be studying. And it's a lot of different things that we cram into 17 weeks. So academically, there's about 380 hours of academic studies, and it really covers the gamut. We talk about community policing and problem solving, first aid, criminal code, and some of the criminal code goes on for hours and hours of different statutes and laws at the US level, federal level, and the state level. We talk about how they originated, how the burden of proof that officers must face when trying to prove a case within the state statutes. We talk a lot about arrest and search and seizure. These are some of the biggest areas where officers get themselves in trouble if they act too fast and aren't sure that they have all the information that they need before making an arrest. We talk about victims' rights. We talk about how we're supposed to handle evidence, and we teach these people about the chain of custody and how evidence has to be protected at each step along the way. We teach them tactical skills, like how to search buildings if there's an alarm at a building, how we safely check that property. We teach them how to make contact with people in a vehicle or during a traffic stop. And then we teach them about verbal skills, how to de-escalate a situation, how maybe instead of using force, you're able to talk somebody down. And we talk about the benefit of why using verbal skills sometimes is way more important and easier and more beneficial in the long run than trying to use force. Talking about the essential skills, we talked on this earlier about the specialized instructors for some of our areas of study. And this is the 3 areas that they have to be certified in to teach these specific skills. Firearms, during the academy, cadets will go through 80 hours of intensive training. And for some candidates, this training will be the first time that they've actually held or fired a gun. And for who knows why, they've never been exposed to firearms in their life, but now they want to be having a career in law enforcement. So we sometimes are teaching brand new skills, but I've also heard our firearms instructors say that sometimes it's easier to train someone who's never fired a gun before than someone who's gotten all sorts of terrible habits and they shoot like this or they hold the gun weird. So they may be trying to break bad habits and reteach a skill. And during this time, we also talk a lot about use of force considerations, particularly lethal force, which is where uses of a firearm would come into play. So there's a lot of legislative and constitutional discussion at this stage too. Next is driving, and that's kind of fun. We all drive all the time every day, but it's a totally different kind of driving when you have to drive in reverse through a serpentine course backwards, or you have to turn around at a high speed and go through basically an obstacle course in a car. So we spend 50 hours teaching these specialized driving skills. And we also talk a lot about the different types of consideration that we need to give to emergent driving. And it's not just about driving fast to get to the call. You have to drive safely to get to the call. So we teach things like that. Some of our young recruits right out of the academy think that, well, it's an emergent call. I can go 100 miles an hour down South Townsend and whoa, whoa, whoa. You got to get there and not hurt anybody else and not hurt yourself. And so we talk about those responsibilities as well. Finally, the last major skill area is arrest control and defensive tactics. And I'm a little partial to this skill because this is one that I teach in the academies. And our cadets will go through about 60 hours of training in this area. And this includes self-defense techniques, so how to deflect an attack if someone is trying to attack an officer. It also teaches how to deal with someone who's being actively combative or who doesn't want to go to jail. Maybe they're not punching at you, but they're flailing. We learn all about different types of ways to deal with people who are physically combative. We also learn about the proper way to handcuff a compliant person. They still have to be put in handcuffs if they're going to jail, but there's a proper way to do that, which I didn't know before I went to the police academy. So we teach very basic, simple things like that to very complex procedures on how to deal with armed folks or people who are being actively combative. And in this area, we do a lot of scenario-based training, how to deal with people who are being simply passive, resistant, and they're just sitting linked arms in front of a doorway versus someone who is armed and aggressive. Another component of the program is fitness and wellness. And we teach this in a couple different ways. We'll teach about cardiovascular exercise. There's a lot of running, jumping, burpees, things like that. We also do push-ups, body weight movements, so that people can learn to be in good physical shape without having to buy a lot of equipment. And then we educate our recruits on proper nutrition, the need for proper sleep, and overall health and wellness to help give them a better chance of having healthy habits throughout their police career. Because it is a stressful job, and being able to have that decompression, that way to let off stress during your career is very important, and we want people to consider physical fitness and overall other wellness habits as an option for, a healthy option for relieving stress. And throughout this training, we're instilling in these cadets the long-term interest in health and wellness so that they can have those good habits throughout their life. So putting it all together, all those skills that we've talked about, after about 17 weeks, cadets will finish their academy experience by taking the POST test. And this is a test that the state creates. They keep the content fairly secret. We know generally what's on it, but we don't know the exact questions, so we can't tell them, oh yeah, it's A on number 1 and B on number 7. So they keep the content fairly secret. It's a very lengthy test. Usually takes them a couple hours to take the test. And then once it's graded and they pass, then they can graduate and move forward with their certificate. At that point, after their graduation ceremony, the agencies who have sponsored people, their cadets now are post-certified, and they can begin their field training experience with their agencies. And those who paid their own way and were not sponsored, they can now apply for jobs anywhere in Colorado, and they will be considered a post-certified candidate. So after 16 to 17 weeks in an academy, they've gone from being a student to being either a police officer if they're sponsored by an agency, or being certified and able to become a police officer at that point in time. So that concludes my presentation. I think if you guys have questions, we can. Yeah, we'll save questions for the end, so that way if you have questions for me or for Sergeant Rumbaugh, you can have you'll have plenty of time to ask both of us. Okay.
I just wanted to say one thing real quick, and Brigitta walked in when the presentation started, so this is Brigitta Sunderman with Colorado Mesa University. Thanks, Courtney, that was a great job. I just wanted to say that this really has been a very heavy lift, and there's really three things that couldn't have made this happen unless we'd have done these. And first was just the hard work and the dedication to get it done. It's been a 2.5 year process. We didn't expect it would take this long, but it has been, but I think we have a great result. Secondly, I can't stress again enough the partnerships. We couldn't do this without Colorado Mesa University and our partner law enforcement agencies like the Sheriff's Office and Sheriff here today. We approached CMU here about 2.5 years ago, and they could have said no, because we couldn't do it without CMU and the education component. They're also contributing financial resources they pay for, or will be paying for Courtney's salary in the summer. If they said yes, they recognized the need that this community had to get good, highly trained, qualified peace officers for our entire region, and it wasn't even a discussion. They immediately said yes. And then secondly, the partnerships we have really with the Sheriff's Department and some of our other agencies, but the Sheriff's Department is sending their trainers, think about it, 80 hours of coursework to train at another academy, and they're not charging anyone. I mean, that's what they're doing to support this academy. So it's the partnerships that are really going to make this thing work. And then lastly, it's the community support for the resources. As you can imagine, this is a heavy lift, and it takes lots of resources, and it's going to continue to take resources. And honestly, we couldn't do this without the 2A funding. That's what's really making this work. And so the decisions we make as a community today, in the past, and for the future are what's going to make these programs work and get very qualified officers here for our community. So with that, and forget it, do you have anything that you want to say?
No, I think you guys are doing a great job.
Okay. Sheriff?
I'm good, Blake.
Okay.
I'll just throw in with you, it's the community support too that we have is just incredible. It really is. And you know, it's time and the need is there for an academy for Montrose. It's a wonderful thing, and we're really excited about it. And I brought some of my staff today. We came in 2 vehicles because there's 5 of them there. So, but we're real excited about that too. And thanks to the chief and to Bill Bell making this up and go, and the city council and our county commissioners too. So it's a good thing, and we're very excited about it. So thank you.
Good morning. As Judy Ann said earlier, I'm Brian Rumbaugh. I'm a detective sergeant with the police department. I have the pleasure of being the supervisor of the drug task force. In my opinion, probably between the 2 agencies, actually, it's the best job out there. So it is. I have no doubt about it, and I can prove it. So the 7th Judicial District Drug Task Force is made up of 1 Montrose PD detective sergeant, 1 Montrose PD detective, and he's also currently a DEA task force officer, and I'll explain a little bit more as we get into this, what a task force officer is for the DEA. 2 Montrose County Sheriff's investigators, 2 DEA special agents, 1 Montrose PD administrative assistant. She doesn't get nearly enough credit for what she does. Not only does she process all of our reports, she answers phones, she also takes intelligence reports. She handles all of our money, all of my ordering, all of my confidential buy funds, all of our evidence. She really makes the task force run. And collectively, we have approximately 92 years of law enforcement experience. All agents have some form of tactical team experience, whether that be on SWAT teams locally or in special forces in the military or some of our DEA special agents have been stationed abroad in places such as Bogota, Colombia, and Afghanistan. And then we also have numerous additional resources. When I first got on the task force, the boss at the Grand Junction DEA office told me, I can't buy you pizza, I can't get you water for an operation, but I can get you a Black Hawk helicopter. I thought he was joking. Until one day I called him up, like, hey, you remember that helicopter you told me about? I had a helicopter, and I called Commander Smith, Commander Cox, and the chief that day and said, hey, I'm bringing a helicopter. So that's the kind of resources that our partnership with DEA brings. So what do we do? Our primary goal is to identify, disrupt, and dismantle drug trafficking organizations. We do that in a lot of different ways. We do that through interdiction processes. We work a lot with our patrol units, the street crimes unit, the sheriff's office, or Colorado State Patrol's STIS division. All they do is interdiction. They will go out on I-70 or the highways and seize pounds of meth, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin at a time, on consent, typically. How they do it is amazing. I don't really know how, but they do an awesome job with us. Controlled purchases. We will do controlled purchases of all kinds of narcotics, guns, stolen property, with either undercover agents. Sometimes we use some of our agents. Sometimes we'll bring in agents from other task forces or other narcotics agencies from around the state. Typically, though, they are informants working off charges that we busted or patrol has busted, or paid informants, where we will pay them money to go and purchase narcotics for us. We will do RIPs. RIPs are a lot of fun. They're buy busts. We had a situation where a gentleman was nice enough to bring us a pound of cocaine from Denver, and we just took his cocaine and took him to jail. We didn't spend any money. A little bit dangerous, but they're fun. And then also we execute a lot of search and arrest warrants. We have all kinds of different techniques that we use to get those search warrants that get us into homes typically, because you'd be amazed with some of the stuff people will do that we can see. But then also the arrest warrants will do month-long, year-long investigations. And when we arrest people, it's typically not one or two. It's 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 people at a time across the state, across the county, across the nation, and sometimes even internationally as well. So our area of operation, the 7th Judicial District, sits right here. So it's kind of a large area. We cover Montrose County, Delta County, Gunnison County, Ouray County, San Miguel County, Hinsdale, for a total of 9,600 square miles, and plus anywhere else we're asked to go. With DEA, our posted duty, the DEA posted duty for Montrose really expanded our reach. When they came in in 2018, they saw a need for a DEA posted duty in Montrose. That's huge, because that took an act of Congress, a literal act of Congress, to move them to Montrose, from Durango to Montrose. So they saw a need, and that partnership has been outstanding. They are part of our team, we're part of their team, to the extent to where we'll go to Denver to help out with DEA operations. We'll go to Utah to do interdiction. So just to kind of highlight that, in 2020 was a decent year. We had 40 arrests, a total of 5.45 pounds of narcotics seized, and that was obviously in the midst of COVID shutdowns and everything else. That consisted of 1.7 pounds of methamphetamine, almost a full pound of cocaine, 2.5 pounds of heroin, and we also assisted on several large marijuana grows. That 2.5 pounds of heroin was one guy, trafficking it from Arizona to Montrose, just like UPS and FedEx, how they all have their designated routes. That was his route, from Phoenix to Montrose. And he admitted in an interview to working for and being recruited by the Sinaloa cartel. So here's just a few things just to highlight what we did. A small residential marijuana grow we assisted with. The guns and body armor on the right-hand side, that was from San Miguel County on a search warrant we conducted on a gentleman that was receiving methamphetamine through the mail. 2.5 pounds of heroin. And then on the far right is a marijuana grow that was on the Grand Mesa, actually on public lands. Those are really fun because that's when we bring in more helicopters and all kinds of stuff. It's really fun. 2021. So 2020 was a good year. 2021, arrests were down a little bit, but that's okay because we had 18 pounds seized last year. 15.6 of that was meth, 1.2 pounds cocaine, 102.46 grams of heroin, and 710 grams of fentanyl. So both the heroin and the fentanyl, just kind of put it in perspective, those are sold and used in 1/10 of a gram portions. We seized 102 of heroin and 710 of fentanyl. Fentanyl really came on the scene this year, in 2021, and that's what's kind of taken up the majority of our time recently. We also had the pleasure of having one of our agents receive the 2021 Colorado Drug Investigators Association Narcotics Officer of the Year. I sit on the Colorado Drug Investigators Association board, so I did not vote, I promise. But this is huge, because this is voted upon across the whole state of Colorado. So he was going up against people from Denver, Aurora, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, guys that are in DEA task forces completely funded by the DEA and FBI. So his peers across the state saw that he was making such an impact that he deserved to be recognized for his impact across the state. So that is a huge nod to him. Federal cases through September of 2021. We don't have any more accurate numbers as of yet, because as we speak, we are in the midst of a federal proceeding at the moment, so there will be more to come. Through September, we had 26 federal indictments, 21 involved in an international money laundering and drug trafficking organization. This is the case that had a direct connection to Sinaloa. People were sending money to Sinaloa, they were sending drugs back. And then the average prison sentence on the Federal Bureau of Prisons is 11 years. This is increasing as we speak. We're getting plea deals every day, or every week at least. That's going up. We've seen upwards of 15, 18, 20. We have a gentleman right now who is looking at a 25-year mandatory minimum in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. This is the kind of connection that our partnership with DEA has brought to our community, that we can actually go after some of these people, these bigger people, and hold them accountable for what they're doing in our community. What we're seeing in Montrose right now, still methamphetamine is probably still number one. We're seeing methamphetamine by the pound, fentanyl by the thousands, heroin by the pound, and money laundering. For those of you that aren't familiar with fentanyl, it goes by cartel 30s, M30s, they call them blues on the street as well. They're these little pills right here. They are small blue, printed with an M and a 30 on them. 26% of these pills that are sent to the federal lab contain a fatal dose. So if you have 4 in your hand, you take one at a time, one of those is probably going to kill you. And that's what we're seeing in our community right now. A lot of it's coming from Mexico. It's being manufactured in Mexico, pressed in Mexico. There is no FDA oversight or anything like that occurring with these pills. Domestic methamphetamine, that always seems to be a question we always get no matter what presentation we do, is how much meth is manufactured within the United States or within Colorado. Well, this will kind of show you. In 2003, domestic laboratories really hit their peak at about 24,000. Since then, last numbers were 2019, there was only 890 labs reported within the United States. So that's really decreased. And that's mainly because Mexico cornered the market. When Mexico can afford to make labs like this, as compared to making it in a Mountain Dew bottle in a trailer, this is a little bit more efficient, a little bit more financially lucrative for the cartels. When it comes to methamphetamine manufacturing in Mexico, they really made a science out of it and an art out of it. So the likelihood of domestic manufacturing is really decreased. Fentanyl. So like I said, 26% of those tablets contain a lethal dose. 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal, depending on that person's body size, tolerance, things of that nature. And the difference between that therapeutic dose and a deadly dose is minute. It's extremely small. This is what really it's public enemy number one for us. We're seeing it the most. We've seen a lot of fatal overdoses, not just in the city, not just in the county, but on the whole western slope in the state of Colorado. And this is exactly what they look like. There are more counterfeit pills on the street than there are legitimate pills. We get that question too, well, what about Oxy on the street? There's more fentanyl out there and counterfeit pills than legitimate. We focus on mainly this stuff right now, as well as methamphetamine. That's what we're seeing the most out of. Consumption. Methamphetamine, obviously I'm sure we've all seen the meth pipes. That's pretty typical. This one was kind of new for us. Typically with tinfoil, they'll use it for heroin consumption. They'll put the heroin on the tinfoil, they'll use a butane torch, heat it up, and they'll inhale the smoke that way. But with heroin, it's very splotchy. This you can see a very clean line, a clean travel. That's fentanyl. They're not popping the pills, they're smoking the fentanyl. Straight off the pill, which leads to more frequent use and obviously higher risk of serious injury and or death. That's what we're looking at right now. One of the cases we're going to be hopefully closing up soon is a fentanyl distribution ring. They also transported pounds of meth, cash. We've seized numerous guns off of this group. So can't talk a whole lot about it, but there's going to be more to come on this. And that's it for my presentation.
So I just wanted to close, and we've got plenty of time for questions, but the amount of fentanyl and heroin that the Drug Task Force has seized in the last 2 years equates to enough to substantially addict every person in Montrose County. So what's the population? 44,000. And think about all of the fentanyl and heroin that we haven't seized. So this guy from Arizona, that's his standard UPS route. Probably shouldn't say UPS. No. That'll get a call. That's their standard route. Okay. So think about what we haven't caught. And when Judy Ann emailed me and asked what we'd like to present, I really wanted to, I guess, just once again bring up the common theme here. So the Drug Task Force would not be this successful, and this is the most successful drug task force that we have ever had under the leadership of Sergeant Rumbaugh and Sheriff Lillard and the police department. So it comes down to partnerships, and if Gene and I aren't working together in DEA, this ain't happening. And so it's really important that we keep those partnerships. And then secondly, again, it's resources. This doesn't happen, all of these investigations, drug buys, getting these people off the street, the federal prosecutions, honestly, without time, hard work, and money. And this stuff is not cheap, but we can't give up the fight because we will give our community away to these drug dealers. And some of these individuals that have been dealing drugs, we've arrested them in the past, and through a state prosecution, they get very little time. In fact, the state legislature further decriminalizes drug dealing, but through now our federal partners, we're able to garner prison sentences anywhere from 15 to 18 years on a plea. So some of these individuals that I used to deal with on the street as a patrol officer and even as a detective, I won't see again, well after I retire. So, and that's honestly what keeps our crime rate down, because these are the individuals that send their people out and they're causing the thefts and the assaults and everything else that has to do with the drug trade. So with that, Sheriff, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
With that, it is absolutely a partnership, Jim. We couldn't do it with just individually, so hats off to this team. And one thing that I might mention is we have a 134-bed facility. We only have 52 inmates in there right now, so the doors are open right now. So. But the working relationship has been absolutely fantastic, and we've got a lot accomplished. We noticed that some of our burglary rates have gone down, and it's all a ripple effect is what it amounts to. So these drug dealers, they'll go out, and some of the users will go out and actually rip people off and go end up selling the stuff so they can get more money to buy dope. And it's a vicious cycle is what it is. So we've made some major headway, and very proud of the team and what they've done. Just to mention that one of the narcotics officer of the year was from the sheriff's office, but they all work together. It's a team effort. With that, thank you.
Well, I actually was gonna grab the mic back from you because I thought you were too humble to mention that. But no, that's a big deal, folks. If you really think about it, across the state of Colorado, this task force has the Colorado Narcotics Officer of the Year. And so that's pretty incredible, and I think that speaks towards the investigations that they're doing and how Brian supervises that team. And so with that, we'll open it up to questions, lots of questions.
I'm remembering back to 4 years ago when city council, your mic isn't on. Yes, it is.
Oh, it isn't.
Okay.
4 years ago, city council was called in for a special meeting. We didn't know why we were showing up. So we walk in, we sit down, and then in walk these three very impressive looking gentlemen and some other sundry people with them, and saying, this is going to be our DEA task force. And I'm looking at these guys saying, what do you mean? We don't need DEA in Montrose, right? Why do we need that type of coverage for drugs? I wasn't nearly aware of the problems that our police force, our sheriff's department have dealt with for years. And when it got to the point where DEA says it's time to move into Montrose, it was time to move into Montrose. So I think we're very fortunate that we have all of you, we have them. Questions? Okay, I'm coming. We'll have to share a mic. Let me see if I can hear what I'm doing here.
You can get your steps in. First, in defense of the chief, I believe that UPS stands for Uncontrolled Pot Smugglers, just for clarity. And the other question I have is for Sergeant Jones, related to the defense and martial arts. I know that some of our officers prefer one form or another, and between Krav Maga and Jiu-Jitsu and so on, is there one preferred form that's going to be taught at the academy?
We'll share the steps.
So yes, in the academy, we will be teaching the style that is endorsed by the FBI. This is the one that's kind of used most across the state and across the country. It's kind of a good baseline. And then when people go to their individual agencies, they'll learn Krav or other styles, maybe Jiu-Jitsu. There's other ground fighting techniques, other martial arts influence techniques, which they will learn at those agencies. We just want to give them a baseline. Here at Montrose, both at the PD and at the Sheriff's Office, we use both FBI and Krav Maga, which is a different style of defensive tactics.
I think Chief touched on this, but I wasn't sure what he was saying. So my question is regarding the decriminalization of possession or distribution. Has that have you changed your approach because of that change in legislation on how you go after these guys?
Let me secretly whisper to Brian to see if he can tell something to you guys that. Okay, yeah, he can talk. Yeah.
Let's try this one.
Check.
No. Okay.
Thank you. So as Chief said earlier, there's been some decriminalization in the narcotic world. So you can possess up to 4 grams of fentanyl, 4 grams of meth, 4 grams of heroin, and you get a ticket instead of going to jail. To put that into perspective, like I said, heroin is typically dealt by the 1/10 of a gram. So you're telling me 4 grams is simple possession? No, that's distribution for heroin. What that has brought to us is, let's say patrol arrested this person on 2 grams of methamphetamine. They would call us, we would come down and interview that person because they're going to jail. That person may turn into an informant for us. So our ability to recruit informants, whether that be paid or working off charges, has become extremely difficult with the decriminalization of it. So yeah, it definitely has affected us in that respect. We've had to get a little creative at times on how we're going to recruit informants or go after some of these people. So yeah, it definitely has had a negative effect on how we operate, but we just had to change our ways a little bit, be a little bit more creative.
Legal but creative.
Exactly.
So there's another aspect to that decriminalization too, that I think, you know, unintended consequences. Before, when you were arrested for methamphetamine, when I, you know, 2002 or 1, when I was a street cop, and I got 2 grams of meth, and I was doing high fives on the side of the road with the other officers. That was a big deal for Montrose at that time. And now that's an everyday occurrence, unfortunately. But the other side of that is that we have a lot of our community members who are hooked on substances. And that's really a sad thing. You know, if any of you have had a family member that has been hooked on substances and the horrible nightmare that causes for everyone. Well, before, we were able to arrest them and it was a felony charge. Okay? And so as the court process goes, in the state court process, usually they would garner some type of a plea deal. Okay? That plea deal would usually come with a substantial addiction, counseling, something along those lines to get them off those substances. Well, today, when we write a ticket to somebody who's in possession of meth or heroin, the DA's office no longer has that higher level charge to hold over someone's head, enter in the public defender's office, and now they plea away probation. It used to be substance abuse and probation was the plea deal to get these people help. And now, because the public defender's office is going to get them out, period, they don't even get substance abuse treatment because there's not that higher charge to plea it to misdemeanor with the court-ordered substance abuse. So, and I've actually gotten calls from mothers and fathers begging me to do something to get their kids off these drugs. And I tell them, you gotta report them. And so they'll call back a couple months later, absolutely disgusted, because their kid got off, right back out on the street, and they're right back to doing drugs. Okay? And we can talk about whose fault that is, but really at the end of the day, it comes down to the decisions we make, whether that's the decisions we make in Denver from a legislative standpoint, the decisions we make right here in our local community about supporting. But all I'm saying is we can't let this fight go, because it'll overrun us if we do. So, sorry, I don't want to end on bad. Let's talk about something else.
Any other questions? Yeah, I'm
I
coming.
could probably say this without that. Why did the politicians do that with the law? What was their thinking behind that, and why didn't they listen to the police officers throughout
So
Colorado?
they didn't ask. I'll just tell you, when that decision was made, they actually didn't ask law enforcement. So Gene's part of CSOC, I'm part of CACP. Those are the chief and sheriff's organizations. They didn't ask. Okay? That's just the long and short of it. Because there was a perception out there that individuals are spending long prison terms for simple possession. Folks, it costs a lot of money to incarcerate people in DOC. So from a long, Gene, do you know of anyone, frankly, ever, that has spent 10 years in prison for simple possession of meth?
No.
It doesn't happen, but there's that national perception out there, the war on drugs, and people, you know, all of these individuals are spending these massive amounts of time in prison. I can tell you, it's not happening. It didn't happen in Colorado, but there's that perception, and sometimes I think Colorado wants to be first, whether that's police reform or drug reform or whatever the case may be.
Or legalization of marijuana.
So, good question.
I am taking this to Kathy. Please understand that the guru is in the room, Jim Scheid. If any of you want to ask questions about the new public safety building.
You didn't even see the bus coming, did you?
My question has to do with the drug enforcement task force coming to Montrose. Are we that bad? Are we unique? Or does Durango, Delta, Junction have the same problem? And if we are unique, we've got a bigger problem, why Montrose?
So what we saw was,
Sorry, I forgot.
so we obviously do have a problem, obviously, based on the stats, but we're in a unique area too. Not just for tourism and everything else, but we're kind of a hub. We're right in between I-70 and New Mexico. Highway 50, Highway 550 are huge trafficking areas. Obviously not as, I guess, well known as maybe I-70 is, because we're not pulling pounds a week on traffic stops, obviously. But if you think about it, how much law enforcement presence is there between Montrose and Durango on a highway as compared to I-70? I-70, there's a lot from the Utah border all the way to Denver. There's a lot of different law enforcement agencies that patrol that area. And in between here and the New Mexico border, or Arizona even, the number of marked units that are out there patrolling every day can get few and far between in some of those areas. So that is why we're kind of a hub. And I can tell you with some of our local people that we've sent away for long periods of time, they have those connections down in Phoenix, Los Angeles, Denver, Colorado Springs, even down to McAllen, Texas. We're just kind of that hub. And DEA saw that as a good opportunity to take a harder look at what the drug trafficking looks like in this area. And obviously we've been very successful with that. In Delta, for example, Delta is one of our areas of operation. For a while, they were getting so much pressure from us up here, so much pressure from the Grand Junction guys, from DEA down in Grand Junction, and the drug task force there, that a lot of them settled in Delta, kind of right in the middle go-between. So in the last year, we've been doing a lot of work in Delta. And it's a lot of people that will go to the chief or the sheriff, and these names, they have no idea who they are. Those are the people we go after. Those people that no one knows that they're doing anything until we show up. So it was a good opportunity for DEA and a great opportunity for us, obviously, to partner with them. That kind of answers your question. Yeah. Yeah. So Chief just brought up a good point. One of those, with that money laundering organization and drug trafficking organization that we took down, he was here in Montrose, lived here in Montrose, but he was a significantly high-ranking person within the Sinaloa drug cartel. When all of our stuff went down and federal indictments came down in that case, there was 21 federal indictments total, one of which for him. He fled to Mexico. He lived here in Montrose for a long time. He fled to El Chapo Guzman's hometown. That was where he was from. So he moved up here to run this money laundering and drug trafficking organization. But he was from the town where El Chapo Guzman grew up and where El Chapo was eventually arrested. So that's just a major connection that Montrose has. And those are kinds of people that have those connections here.
Question?
One more.
Okay, you stand up and yell.
Okay. So with the academy, you were talking about cost and sponsors and all that. So if somebody wanted to do it without a sponsor, approximately what is the cost of the academy?
$11,000. And that's pretty much the going rate, whether that's TCR or that's Western Colorado Community College's Academy in Grand Junction that Brigetta oversees. There are some academies on the eastern slope and in Summit County that actually cost more. I think one of the really cool things is, as we grow as an academy, is that we're not just looking at having the academy, but we're also looking at ways to have student housing, I know the city manager and I have talked in the future. We're kind of in this geographical oddity where we have a lot of really good partnerships, like with Paul Miller. He allows all the law enforcement officers to use the San Juan range. When we have driving training, we have to drive 60 miles north to Grand Junction. They've got a driving track. And I'm hopeful someday that for the future, for the law enforcement agencies in this region, maybe we can look at a driving track and a firing range to kind of complement the academy here. With the new building, we will have a training room that's 45 by 45 feet square. That mats will roll right out into it, and so we'll be able to host all of the defensive tactics training, not only for the academy, but it will be free to use for all the law enforcement agencies in the region if they want to come and do their training there. So we're growing, for sure. Thank you.
You touched on it, but I was just gonna ask, how many cadets will you have at a time, and do they have housing, or where do they live?
So our goal, I think, this year and across the state, just to let everybody know, I don't know of a single law enforcement agency across the state right now that's kind of in a hiring crisis. There are less individuals that want to be police officers today than there were a year and a half ago. And you can all imagine why that may be. So I think the academy stats have been down a little bit. Do you want to discuss that or talk about that, and then we'll talk about?
Yeah, we average about 20 cadets for every academy. We actually went up right after, about last year, we went up to about 24. But this, right now, the academy we have right now is the lowest it's ever been. We're at about 15 or 16. So.
And I would say this is our first year too. And so, you're going to have bugs, you're going to want to work some kinks out. And so I don't think 15 is necessarily a bad number at all. I think that's a really good instructor to student ratio. And especially for our first year, I think that would be a good target for us. Thank you.
Housing.
Oh, housing. So, can I talk about housing? I'm looking at the boss. Yeah. I don't know where we are on that.
So we're really excited. I think it's been talked about here, and I know some people from the community have already gone on the tour because you're associated with the CMU Advisory Board or some of the other groups, but a recent really exciting project is the house on the corner of Cascade and South 2nd was purchased by the city of Montrose for about $699,000. And that was a bunch of office spaces inside that house that's actually going to turn into academy housing for the cadets. And it can be for the city of Montrose, the sheriff's department, or cadets that come in and just need housing and want to pay rent. So we're going to make that available for them here by the beginning of the academy this summer. We're doing remodel with Jim and his team doing a great job getting ready for that. We're also going to use that for new hire. People that are coming into our community can't find housing, but they want to start working for a lot of our larger employers, city, county, hospital, school district, whoever it might be. We'll have a few slots in there for new hires in our community, because as we've talked about in the past, the housing crisis is really difficult. A lot of our larger employers are losing people. You make an offer to somebody, they come here, they're excited to get started, they can't find a place to live, so they turn that offer down and they go back to wherever they're from, or they go to another state. So we're really excited about that partnership. CMU is going to come in, and by July of this year, they'll pay city will do $500,000 of that $699. The $199,000 will come back as a reimbursement from CMU. So it's a true city CMU partnership, and we're really excited about that.